Welcome to the Courting Happiness podcast. This is a space where self-care becomes part of your day. A space where you learn evidence-based strategies to help your life, share it with those you love, and cultivate well-being at work. I'm your host, Dr. Kortni Alston. I'm a former news director, television reporter turned happiness scholar, TEDx speaker, and transformational trainer. I also understand hardships. While working my dream job in television, I lived a nightmare suddenly becoming a young widow after 86 days of marriage. I became committed to learning more about resilience, healing, and happiness. This is how I discovered my area of research, which is positive psychology. Now I'm living my calling of training individuals and organizations on happiness. And my new chapter begins with being happily engaged. The Courting and Courting Happiness is about a true courtship. I like to say commitment with happiness. The K in courting stands for the vulnerability of sharing my story, inspirational interviews with phenomenal people, the infusion of positive psychology, and so much more. You'll learn how to commit to your well-being one episode at a time. I hope you subscribe and share. So, are you ready? Let's get started. Welcome to episode 95. I'm Dr. Kortni Alston. Thank you so much for listening. I am so happy that you're here. So I want to start off with a quote from an individual that I greatly admire, Dr. Maya Angelou. And she said, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." Have you ever thought of that before? Does it resonate with you? Is there really an untold story that you have inside you that you're craving to share? Well, I will say this, that stories are something that speaks to my soul. When I was a television reporter, I loved meeting new people and hearing their stories. I also considered it a great honor that individuals would share their stories with me, that they would trust me with their story. Did you know this? Did you know that storytelling can be good for your mental health? Well, we're going to talk about that today, and it comes from the Very Well Mind. The website shares really great information as it relates to work and life and balance, and I love it as it relates to such a wonderful guide and resource in regards to information as it relates to well-being. Well, they share an article focusing on the links between storytelling and mental health. We're going to talk about that on this episode today and answer that question. Did you know that storytelling can be good for your mental health? Well, here are some benefits of storytelling. It can boost listening skills and foster imagination. So I will say that becoming an active listener is something that I treasure, I value. I think I've shared this in past episodes of Courting Happiness. As a manager, when I was working as a news director, I was trained in a fellowship program for other people, other news leaders in the industry. And I remember during one of the workshops, it talked about the value of undivided attention. And it always stuck with me. To this day, I think about how they talked about the impact and how important it was in terms of making sure that your team feels supported. And I really value that information because becoming an active listener can create real, true focus. And it also can help develop your social skills. And so what I love so much about the article, it talks about that. It talks about how it can help develop your social skills. And then also as it relates to true benefits of active listening. I feel like active listening is something that benefits all parties involved. It benefits the individual that's actively listening, right, in terms of learning something more. And then it also values the person who's sharing because they feel seen, safe, and supported. So they also mention this when we watch movies or read books, it can really kind of create this immersion as relates to developing our imagination. So on top of really helping us in terms of listening skills, it can also foster our imagination. I will say for me, when I'm watching movies or reading books, it really helps spark so much of my creativity and inspiration. And I really value that they share that, because what it does for me, it takes me sometimes to a different place, or it can also allow me to really um, process what speaks to me and my maybe my current circumstances or even my past circumstances. So there's so much as relates to it fostering imagination. Now, can I also say this is that one of the things that I love, it takes me back in time in regards to having that like all those nostalgic feelings, especially when I'm watching shows that I loved as a child, like Willy Wonka in the Chocolate Factory, starring Gene Wilder, and um, uh, oh gosh, Mary Poppins. I love all things Mary Poppins, and oh gosh, the list goes on. And the Wizard of Oz, of course, and the Wiz. And I say that because to this day, here I am, this big kid, and I fondly talk about Wicked so much. I love Wicked. Love the fact that I've been able to see Wicked in London, and also when the show traveled to Atlanta. And I am looking forward to being completely immersed when I actually see Wicked on Broadway. So it's interesting, even as I'm talking to you about the theater, right? It really allows me to feel transported. It is really just a really phenomenal source of creativity and inspiration. So another that they mention is it can increase empathy and memory retention. And I tell you, I love the latter. Definitely talking about memory retention. I love both because I'm huge supporter as it relates to empathy. But as time goes on, I'm like, wow, how did that slip by me? Right. So it's great that they talk about memory as well. So again, the article talks about how our brain, in terms of, releasing information as it relates to that's associated in regards to empathy. And they talk about releasing oxytocin, and which is associated with empathy. And I love how they are talking about what that process is as it relates to the brain itself and how it affects the brain. I will say that one of the things, every time I hear empathy, every time I see empathy, every time I think of empathy, I think of the leading scholar in that area, which is Dr. Brene Brown. And Dr. Brene Brown, for those of you who may not know Dr. Brene Brown, she is an incredible researcher dealing with empathy, shame, and vulnerability. Google her name. You will find so much great information in regards to her TED Talk and her multiple best-selling books, as well as her podcasts in regards to her research. And as a matter of fact, I will share her TED Talk on the episode page of this podcast. So you can certainly check it out right there on the episode page by going to drcourtneyalston.com/podcast/episode 95. And so Dr. Brene Brown says, empathy has no script. There is no right way or wrong way to do it. It's simply listening, holding space, withholding judgment, emotionally connecting, and communicating that incredible healing message of you're not alone. You are not alone. So can you see why I'm always thinking about Dr. Brene Brown when it comes down to all great things empathy? Because how she conceptualizes it, how she also shares really the great benefits of empathy speaks to so much value in regards to empathy. And also the fact that I love how the quote ended, a healing message of you're not alone. So Earlier, I talked about how it helps with memory before I forget, right? And so stories can help you recall. The article talks about Jennifer Aker, who's a marketing professor at Stanford Graduate School of Business. And she says that people remember information when it's weaved into narratives up to 22 times more than facts alone. So there's something just so powerful about a story, right? And it's interesting working in news, when we would share information, when you're watching the news and you're hearing information or seeing information, it's weaved into stories, into what we call sound bites, and sharing these experiences of other individuals. So I love how they talked about Professor Aker and her work in regards to the value and the impact of narratives and how we can weave them in, and in how it helps us in regards to recalling information. The next one is increases positive emotions. Whew, that is something we talk about a lot here on Courting Happiness, because this article talks about all things positive psychology in regards to positive emotions. So it speaks about really a recent research in regards to positive psychology and how we tell our stories controls our mood and self-image. The article goes on to talk about how stories can uplift us and change our moods. And this change, mood, and outlook is no small matter. A reasonable amount of positive emotion and optimism allows us to cope better with adversity and meet obstacles we face. So, talks about really the great power of how it increases positive emotions. It helps us in regards to, in terms of that level of processing. I love it because as they're talking about positive emotions, it resonated with me because my TED Talk focuses on my journey as a widow. When I became a widow at 25 years old, when I was working my dream job in television in Philadelphia. And I talked about how I was working my dream job and yet living a nightmare in regards to dealing with loss. But it also talks about how even then, when I wasn't a happiness scholar, right, in my 20s, and I later began studying happiness, positive psychology. That is when I started my PhD program at the University of Florida in my late 30s, early 40s. And when I look back on that Kortni that talks about that, well, actually lived that time in her life, I think about how I processed it. And a person who studied all things in regards to positive psychology and understands happiness research, it was my level of optimism that really helped me get through. And at that time, when my late husband died, my mother was suffering with a rare cancer. So it was a real trying time. But one of the things that really stood out was that I always was grateful. I was grateful for what I have. And at that point, what I was having, my mother was still with me, and I, treasured those moments. And I even look back and treasured the kind of relationship I had in regards to the type of relationship that my late husband, whose name is Brian. And so I think because how I processed, it allowed me to really kind of embrace levels of a very hard and challenging journey. But understanding, I remember one time I shared this to myself, looking in the mirror at my late husband's parents' home after finding out that he died. I remember looking in their mirror and saying, "Whew, this is going to make you stronger. This is going to make you stronger." And it has. It's made me stronger. It's made me more empathetic. It's made me very purpose-driven. It's made me value meaning. It's made me so many things. And I think about that speaks to the value of resilience, but also the importance of optimism. So that resonated with me on so many different levels. And it's interesting because as I look at my life now, in my late 40s, engaged to an amazing man that I talk about a lot, my fiance Ken, and I sit back and I really treasure some of the things I've experienced because it's made me even more empathetic. And it makes me see other individuals differently. It's interesting because a dear friend of mine, when we initially met before we became, quote, dear friends, she shared a story with me as relates to some of the hardships she was going through in her life. And I remember listening to her actively. And I remember she said something later on as our friendship grew. She said, when I was sharing my story with you, you never looked at me like something was wrong with me. All I saw was someone that really just valued me and allowed me to share. And I said, wow. She goes, you looked at me with this level of empowerment, even though I'm sharing this hardship. And so that lens, I think, is so important because I can remember a time a couple of years ago, I was sharing my story with a person. We were out with our circle of people. And I remember sharing my TED talk with her. And I remember she looked at me and I think she was trying to be empathetic, but it just came off as, oh, I feel so sorry for you, which don't get me wrong. Of course, this is a hardship, of loss, but I didn't feel like I didn't feel seen by that person because I felt that it was not very authentic, or maybe she just wasn't very comfortable in terms of knowing what to say. So my girlfriend sharing with me how I looked at her, it says so much and it speaks so much to me because I can recall casually sharing this at a table with another individual, and she looked at me as I felt horror. I mean, but I also don't know how she was processing based on her own lens. But I know I left there and I felt, wow, I didn't feel comfortable sharing that after I shared it because I just didn't like how I felt. And when I look back on it, with all that I now know about, positive psychology and being a person who values observing human behavior, I don't know what she was dealing with. I have no idea. Right. And then I think that's empathy, right? That's empathy in regards to, even though I was sharing levels of my hardship that I dealt with in my 20s with her, I don't know how she received it. So it's interesting what we can learn when we hear and we share stories. Well, I want to hear your stories. And I want you to go to drkortnialston.training/share your story. So that's DRKORTNIALSTON.training/share your story. And I want you to share how the podcast has served you. You can also go to drkortnialston.com and you can find that link on our page there. Matter of fact, if you go to drkortnialston.com and if you go to our podcast and you click, it will take you down to different options that you have. And one of them is, how has Dr. Kortni helped you? So you can go there to find the information to be able to share your story. And we're doing this to celebrate our, can you believe this, 100 episodes? An upcoming second anniversary of Courting Happiness podcast. I can't believe it's been 2 years. And that's because of you. I would love to know your story. on how the podcast helped you. Did the podcast give you permission to focus in on maybe well-being at work? Or you're a leader that listens and you now think even more proactively about well-being of your team? I want to know your stories. I would love to hear your stories in regards to how courting happiness has served you. So again, you can check out that page, which is drkortnialston.training/share your story. Again, that's drkortnialston.training/share hyphen dash your story dash. So let me go back to sharing that. drkortnialston.training/share dash your dash story. And if that has confused you a little bit, because as I'm sharing this, I'm hoping I'm trying to be as clear as possible, but please just go to drkortnialston.com, go to podcast. It takes you to the drop down menu, and then you'll see how has Dr. Kortni helped you. So I think that's clear. At least I hope it is. And I'm really hoping to hear from you. All of you that listen, I treasure each and every one of you. I am so appreciative of every download, every share, every comment. Just know that every time I hear from someone that listens to the Courting Happiness podcast, it makes me want to continue being able to share more and more and more. And so I really appreciate you. So this 100 episodes, this upcoming second anniversary, this is a shared celebration because I am so grateful for you. I hope you share your story with us. Remember, your well-being is your most important job, and I'm always here to help. Thank you so much for listening. Let's continue this conversation online. Email us at podcast@drkortnialston.com. That's podcast@drkortnialston.com. Join us on Instagram at Courting Happiness. Don't forget, that's courting with a K. Also, I hope you join our private Facebook community. You can find us at Courting Happiness Podcast Community. Our private Facebook group is a safe haven to share, meet more people looking to build positive relationships, focus on well-being, and create a happier life. Now, are you ready to spread happiness? We hope you subscribe and share this podcast with your family, friends, coworkers, and all the important people in your world. We release a new episode every Thursday. Congratulations on your continued commitment to your courting happiness journey. Thank you so much for listening. We want you to be well, be happier, and be kinder to yourself. We can't wait to see you next week.